The rifle's blast cut through the still desert air before Catherine could even think about fleeing. The bullet ricocheted off the rock inches from his head, sending fragments of stone grazing his sweaty face. She held her breath and huddled against the rocky outcrop that offered her temporary protection from the merciless Arizona sun. And now from her pursuers. 24 hours, she murmured, looking down at her thin leather boots already ruined by sand and rocks. 24 hours of freedom cost me my life. Her throat was as dry as the desert that surrounded her. The canteen, empty since noon, hung useless on his shoulder. The elegant pale blue dress she had worn to escape her father's house was torn at the hem and stained with red dirt. Her brown hair, normally styled in perfect curls, fell in tangled locks over her shoulders. Another shot. Closer. Male voices echoed between the rock formations. "Miss Montgomery, we know you're there. General Reynolds awaits your return." Catherine closed her eyes. General Wilbur Reynolds, 62, decorated hero of the Indian Wars and future husband chosen by his father. A man whose breath smelled like whiskey and whose eyes roamed freely over his body during family dinners. A man who was old enough to be his grandfather. "I'd rather die in this desert," he whispered, as he desperately searched for an escape route among the scorching rocks. The sun was beginning to set, turning the Sonoran desert blood red. If night came, she would have a chance to escape in the darkness, if he could survive until then. His father, Colonel Robert Montgomery, commander of Fort Hadley, had certainly sent his best men, not to save his daughter, but to regain his property, his bargaining chip with the influential General Reynolds. A movement caught his eye. It didn't come from the direction of the soldiers, but from the top of a rock formation to their left. For a moment, Catherine saw a silhouette silhouetted against the setting sun. A figure that certainly did not belong to the American army. Tall, with long black hair, a slender and strong body. Apache. His heart sped up even more. If her father's soldiers didn't kill her, the natives would. Everyone knew the stories. Tortures, scalps, white women captured and subjected to unspeakable horrors. Stories that his father and his officers often told around the dinner table, justifying their brutal campaigns. "Miss Montgomery," the voices were closer now, "your father promised leniency if he returned of his own free will." Lies. She knew her father too well. Robert Montgomery knew no mercy, especially when it came to disobedience. The scar on his wrist, hidden beneath his long sleeves, was a constant reminder of that. Catherine looked up at the top of the rocks again. The figure had disappeared. Maybe it was just delirium caused by heat and fear. She tried to swallow, but her mouth was too dry. Dehydration was already starting to take its toll. When he tried to move, his legs gave way. She fell to her knees, scraping her palms on the sharp rocks. The world spun, colors mixing like watercolors in the rain. It was at that moment that he saw him again. No longer a distant silhouette, but a real man, less than 10 steps away from her, an Apache warrior, with his face painted for war, wearing only leather pants and carrying an old but well-maintained rifle. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that paralyzed her. "Kill me quickly," she whispered, finding a last shred of dignity. "Please." The warrior did not answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering a riddle. A long scar ran from his left temple to his chin, white against his sun-tanned skin. Soldiers' footsteps and voices echoed closer and closer. The Apache glanced briefly in the direction of the sound, and something in his face hardened. When he looked back at her, Catherine saw a decision form in his eyes. In one fluid movement, he walked over and crouched in front of her. Up close, she noticed details: a bear claw necklace, carefully applied ritual paint, ancient scars from past battles. But it was his eyes that captured her, eyes that held anger, yes, but also something more, something unexpected. "Montgomery's daughter," he said in surprisingly clear, if heavily accented, English. Catherine felt her blood run cold in her veins. "Do you know me?" "I know your father." A shadow passed over the warrior's face. "Man of blood." With a quick movement, he reached out and touched the partially visible scar on his wrist. The touch made Catherine shiver, not from fear, but from a strange understanding that passed between them. "Choose now," said the Apache. "They," he pointed in the direction of the soldiers, "or me." The question hovered between them like heat billowing over the desert. In her mind, Catherine saw General Reynolds' face, felt her father's controlling grip, imagined the life that awaited her, confined, submissive, violated. The soldier's footsteps were almost upon them. "You," she replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I choose you." Without hesitation, the warrior took her in his arms. To her amazement, instead of brutality, there was a gentle firmness to his touch. He carried her quickly behind the rocks to a small recess she hadn't noticed before. There, tied to a thorny bush, a painted horse waited patiently. "I'm Tocho," he said as he placed her on the animal. "Do you have a name?" "Catherine," she replied, clinging to the horse's mane as he mounted behind her. A brief smile touched the warrior's lips. "Catherine," he uttered, before whispering something to the horse in his native language. The animal raced across the desert, moving away from the soldiers. Catherine felt Tocho's strong arm around her waist, keeping her steady as they rode toward the setting sun. To the heart of Apache country, into the unknown. The sun was sinking below the horizon when Tocho and Catherine finally slowed their ride. For hours, he had held her tightly against his chest as the painted horse cut through the desert like a wild spirit, following trails invisible to the untrained eye. Catherine, exhausted and dehydrated, wavered between consciousness and delirium, her head occasionally lolling forward. "Hang in there, Catherine." Tocho's voice sounded in her ear, a deep whisper that seemed to blend with the hot desert wind. "Not far now." They had left the open lands behind, entering a stretch of canyon where red rock formations stood like silent sentinels. The air was cooler there, protected from the scorching sun that now turned the sky purple. Catherine struggled to keep her eyes open, vaguely registering the wild beauty of the place. "Water?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. As if he had heard her plea, Tocho guided the horse to a small crevice in the canyon wall. Disappearing into the shadow, they emerged into a small hidden oasis. A spring gushed from between the rocks, forming a crystal-clear pool surrounded by resilient vegetation. Tocho dismounted in one fluid motion and raised his arms to help her down. Catherine's legs gave way immediately, but he held her, guiding her into the water. "Drink slowly," he instructed, kneeling beside her. "Little first." Her hands shook as she dipped them into the cool water, bringing it to her chapped lips. The first sip was an explosion of relief that coursed through his entire body. Ignoring Tocho's advice, she tried to drink more, but he gently held her wrists. "You're going to get sick." "A little now, more later." Their eyes met, and Catherine saw something unexpected in that look. Not the hatred she had expected from an enemy of her father's, but a compassionate firmness. She nodded, silently agreeing with his guidance. While Tocho took care of the horse, Catherine observed the warrior more closely. His movements were precise and economical, like those of a desert predator. The war paint on his face had been partially erased by the sweat of the journey, revealing striking features: high cheekbones, a defined jaw, and that deep scar that ran down his left cheek like a frozen bolt of lightning. "Why didn't you kill me?" she finally asked, her voice firmer after the water. Tocho stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. Silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. "Killing her doesn't bring my family back," he finally replied. "Blood calls for more blood. We've spilled too much already." "My father," began Catherine, but her voice trailed off. Your father leads attacks against my people. 3 moons ago, soldiers burned our village at dawn. My wife, my son." His face hardened at the memory. "I wasn't there to protect them." The weight of the revelation fell on Catherine like an avalanche. His father, the Honorable Colonel Montgomery, always spoke of necessary operations against hostile savages. Now those savages had faces, they had losses, they had pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words seeming inadequate given the magnitude of the tragedy. Tocho studied his face for a long moment. "You're not your father. And that's why he saved me, because I'm not him?" "I saved you because I saw your marks." He pointed to the scar on his wrist. "I saw fear in your eyes. Not Apache's, but yours." Catherine instinctively covered her wrist, the memory of her father's punishment still vivid in her mind. At 16, she had tried to help an Apache family with food during a harsh winter. Colonel Montgomery had found out and made her learn a lesson in loyalty. "Where are you taking me?" he asked after another moment of silence. "For the people of peace, Apaches who don't want war, hiding where soldiers can't be found." He returned to her side, offering a small strip of dried meat. "Eat. You'll need strength." As she chewed the hard food, Catherine watched the sky through the opening of the small canyon. Stars began to dot the dark blanket that descended over the desert. I had never seen so many, so bright. In the fort, the lights and smoke overshadowed this spectacle. "We must go before the moon rises," said Tocho, preparing the horse again. "Soldiers search at night. They have Pima trackers." "How do you know my father will send trackers?" A bitter smile crossed the warrior's face. "I know Montgomery like I know a rattlesnake. He doesn't give up on his prey." When they rode again, the desert had changed. What had been a scorching inferno during the day had become a world of blue and silver shadows under the growing moonlight. The cold air bit through Catherine's thin dress, making her shiver. Sensing her discomfort, Tocho stopped briefly to remove a fur blanket from his saddlebag, wrapping it around her. The warmth and herbal scent of the blanket immediately enveloped her. "Thank you," she murmured, surprised by the gesture. They rode in silence along the winding paths between the rock formations. Catherine felt torn between terror at the unknown before her and relief at being away from the forced marriage that awaited her. Had she escaped from one prison only to be captured by another? Or would this be your true freedom? "What will you do to me when we reach your people?" he finally asked. Tocho remained silent for so long that she thought he hadn't heard the question. "My people will decide," he finally replied, "but I will speak for you." It was a small promise, but in that moment, under the starry Arizona sky, it was all Catherine had to hold on to. Dawn found Catherine waking with a start. For a moment, confusion overwhelmed her senses. The packed earth floor beneath her, the scent of dry herbs, and the distant sound of voices speaking in a language she didn't understand. Then, memories of the last 2 days flooded his mind. The escape, the desert, Tocho. She sat up slowly, looking at the small shelter where she had slept. It was a simple structure made of branches and covered with fur, but surprisingly welcoming. Someone, probably a woman judging by the small, colorful beaded ornaments, had organized the space carefully. A rough woolen blanket had covered her during the night, and her ruined boots had been replaced with soft leather moccasins. Catherine stood up cautiously and pulled aside the curtain that served as a door. The golden light of the rising sun revealed a camp hidden in a small valley between rugged mountains. He counted about 15 shelters similar to his own, arranged in a semicircle. In the center, a fire where 3 women were preparing something in an iron cauldron, an object clearly obtained in exchanges with white people. Curious gazes turned to her immediately. Children stopped their games to stare at her. An old man sitting under a stunted tree narrowed his eyes in his direction. Catherine felt the urge to retreat into shelter, but she resisted. Whether this would be her refuge or her prison, she would face the situation with the dignity that her father had never managed to extract from her. "You're awake." Tocho's voice came from behind her. Turning around, Catherine saw him approaching. In daylight, without the war paint, he looked different. Younger, perhaps closer to 30. He was wearing leather pants and a simple cotton shirt, probably obtained at a trading post. The scar on his face seemed less severe, almost blending into the firm features of his face. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice still hoarse with thirst. "Nameless place for white people," Tocho replied, handing him a gourd of fresh water. "For us, mountain of the watchful spirit, soldiers do not come here." As she drank, Catherine took a closer look at the small camp. It wasn't a traditional village like the ones I'd seen in book illustrations. It seemed temporary, mobile, as if it could be dismantled and rebuilt elsewhere in a matter of hours. He also noticed the shortage of men, especially elderly people and boys, and understood that this was a community of survivors. "The women have prepared clothes for you," said Tocho, indicating a bundle of cloth next to the shelter. "Your dress draws too much attention." Catherine nodded, aware that her torn attire not only marked her as white, but also left her inappropriately exposed. "Why are they helping me?" he asked. "After everything my father did." Tocho kept his eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance. "Elder Nasha says you have purpose here. She had vision with you." Before Catherine could ask further, an elderly woman approached them, leaning on a cane ornamented with carved symbols. His grey hair was braided with red ribbons, and his wrinkled face displayed a serenity that seemed incongruous with the circumstances of his people. "This is Nasha," Tocho introduced, bowing his head in respect. "She is our spiritual guide." The old woman studied Catherine with incredibly lively eyes in her aged face. Without warning, he reached out and touched the scar on Catherine's wrist, just as Tocho had done in the desert. "Marked by her own blood," Nasha said in surprisingly clear English. "Like Tocho, marked by his own." Catherine looked confused at Tocho, who explained, "The scar on my face. White soldier, 6 summers ago." "Didn't your father recognize a warrior who healed?" Nasha asked, her piercing eyes fixed on Catherine. "No, I don't know," Catherine replied, feeling the weight of the truth. How many natives had his father injured? How many lives were destroyed without ever looking at their faces? Nasha nodded, as if the answer confirmed something important. "Come, eat. Then the council will decide." As they followed the elderly woman to the central fire, Catherine noticed that some of the tribe kept their distance, casting suspicious glances. Others, especially children, watched her with open curiosity. A girl of about 5 approached, shyly touching the fabric of Catherine's torn dress. "She's never seen fabric like this," Tocho explained, a slight smile softening his normally stern features. "Her name is Tala. It means wolf." Catherine smiled at the child, who smiled back before running back to a group of women. A lump formed in his throat. These were the wild creatures that his father swore were beyond civilization. Children with shy smiles, women preparing meals, elders sharing stories. A younger woman with a baby strapped to her back offered Catherine a wooden bowl containing thick porridge. "Food will give strength," said Tocho, sitting down beside him. "Council will meet at noon." "And what exactly will they decide?" Catherine asked, tasting the food, surprisingly tasty, seasoned with something sweet. "Whether you stay or go. And what do we do with the daughter of the man who hunts our people?" A heavy tension fell upon them. Catherine realized that her life was literally in the hands of those who had every reason to hate her. "If they decide I should go, where would I go?" he muttered. "I can't go back." Tocho remained silent for a moment, as if calculating something. "There is a place called Refuge," 2 days south. Missionaries. They accept everyone. What if they decide I should stay? Their gazes met, full of unasked questions, unexplored possibilities. Then you learn our ways, replied Tocho simply, and choose your own name. The council met under the shade of a large oak tree on the edge of the camp. 7 elders, 4 men and 3 women, sat in a semicircle, propped up on fur cushions. Catherine remained standing before them, feeling strangely calm despite the situation. The Apache clothes she wore now, a simple buckskin tunic decorated with colorful beads and soft leather pants, were surprisingly comfortable compared to her starched cotton dress. Tocho stood by his side, his face impassive. In the last few hours, he had explained the traditions of the council to her, teaching her to behave with respect. "Look them in the eye when you talk," he had said. "My people see the truth in the soul through the eyes." Nasha, seated in the center of the semicircle, began the meeting in Apache. His voice, though thin with age, carried natural authority. Catherine caught the name Montgomery several times, provoking murmurs among the elders. "She asks you to tell your story," Tocho translated, "because he ran away from his own people." Catherine took a deep breath, looking at each face in front of her. He saw skepticism, distrust, curiosity, and in one or two, something akin to compassion. "I ran away because I had no choice," he began, his voice firmer than he expected. "My father promised me to a man 3 times my age, a man who killed many of his people and is proud of it." When Tocho translated, one of the elders, a man with an eagle feather stuck in his grey hair, spat on the ground, showing contempt. "I've always been a prisoner, even though I live in a big house," Catherine continued. "My father is not a kind man. He believes that strength is the only law that matters." Hesitantly, she lifted her wrist, completely exposing the scar she normally kept hidden. "He did it when he caught me feeding an Apache family during the harsh winter. He said I was betraying my race." A heavy silence fell over the council as Tocho translated his words. The women exchanged meaningful glances. An elderly man, whose face was marked by deep wrinkles, then spoke in Apache. His voice was guttural, full of emotion. "He asks why we should trust the daughter of the man who ordered the massacre of our people," Tocho translated, his own face hardening at the memory. "Why not use it as a bargaining chip to end the attacks?" Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She had already considered this possibility, being used as a hostage. That's what his father would do, certainly. "Because my father wouldn't negotiate," he answered honestly. "He would send more soldiers to kill you all. To him, I would just be a reason to attack." While Tocho translated, Catherine observed the faces of the elders. Some nodded, as if they had already expected this answer. Nasha spoke again, at greater length this time. When he finished, all eyes turned to Catherine. "She asks what you can offer our people," Tocho said. "Everyone here works. Everyone contributes." Catherine pondered for a moment, aware that her answer could determine her fate. "I can read and write English," he offered. "I know the ways of white people, their laws, how they think. I can help interpret documents, teach children." She paused, remembering something important. "And I know medicine. My mother was a healer before she died. I know herbs, sewing, medicine." Interest aroused in the council when Tocho translated. One of the elders, a petite woman with an elaborate necklace of blue beads, leaned forward, speaking enthusiastically. "Nayeli says our healer died in the last attack," Tocho explained. "Many are sick without their knowledge." The discussion continued among the elders for several minutes. Catherine remained silent, watching the exchange of opinions that would determine her future. He realized that Nasha was speaking in his favor, while the man with the eagle feather argued against his staying. Finally, Nasha raised her hand, silencing the debate. He spoke with authority, his gaze fixed on Catherine. "The council decides that you will stay for a moon," Tocho translated. "You will show your healing knowledge. If you prove your worth and loyalty, you will be able to stay." Catherine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I appreciate the opportunity," he replied, bowing his head in respect. The elders rose, signaling the end of the council. As they dispersed, Nasha approached Catherine, taking her hands in hers. "Your heart has two voices now," said the old woman in English. "One from the world he left, one from the world he found. Listen to both." With these enigmatic words, Nasha walked away, leaning on his carved cane. "What happens now?" Catherine asked Tocho when they were alone. "Now you learn our ways," he replied, a slight smile softening his normally stern features. "Starting with this." He handed her a small leather pouch containing healing instruments, bone needles, small stone knives, empty medicine bottles. "Nasha believes in you," Tocho said, his intense gaze meeting hers. "Me too." Catherine accepted the bag, feeling its weight, not just physical, but the weight of the trust placed in her, of the responsibility she now carried. "I won't disappoint you," she promised, both to Tocho and herself. "Come," he said, leading the way back to camp. "There's a lot to learn." As they walked together, Catherine realized that, for the first time in years, she felt something she had forgotten: hope. A week has passed since Catherine was provisionally accepted into the Apache. Each dawn brought new learning and challenges as she absorbed knowledge about the medicinal herbs, healing rituals and customs of the people who had sheltered her. That morning, Catherine went out early to collect plants, along with Nijoni, a young Apache woman who had lost her husband in the same attack that took her family from Tocho. Unlike many in the camp, Nijoni was open to the white woman's presence, eager to share knowledge and learn different medical techniques. "This plant relieves fever," explained Nijoni in his halting English, showing an herb with toothed leaves. "We boil it with water and wild honey." Catherine examined the plant, recognizing it. "My mother called it mugwort. We used it in a similar way." The two women smiled as they filled their baskets, moving between the knowledge of two worlds that destiny had intertwined. As they worked, Catherine noticed that Nijoni often looked over his shoulder toward the valley below. "Are you worried about something?" Catherine asked. Nijoni hesitated. "Tocho and others guard the entrance to the valley. Soldiers were seen 2 days' journey from here." Catherine's heart quickened. "Do you think they're looking for me?" "Your father doesn't give up easily," Nijoni replied, as Tocho said. Back at camp, Catherine noticed the tension in the air. Warriors checked their weapons, women gathered essential belongings. It was clear that everyone was preparing for a possible escape. Tocho returned at noon, his face grave as he talked to the elders. Catherine waited patiently until he approached her. "Your fiancé leads battalion with trackers," he informed bluntly. 25 men, searching in a fan pattern. "Is General Reynolds here in person?" Catherine asked, feeling nausea rising in her throat. "Yes, he seems determined to find her." Tocho watched his face closely. "You're afraid of him." It wasn't a question, but an observation. Catherine nodded, unable to hide the terror that Reynolds's name provoked. "He has influence over my father. If he finds me, no matter what I say, he will say I was kidnapped and use that as justification to kill you all." Tocho remained silent for a moment, his black eyes studying the horizon. "We have to move camp to the mountains to the north. Because of me." Guilt weighed on Catherine like a wet blanket. "I don't want to bring more suffering to your people." "Our people move like the wind," replied Tocho, with surprising serenity. "It's always been like this. Roots that are too deep are dangerous for those who live surrounded by enemies." That afternoon, the camp turned into an organized hive. Within a few hours, all structures were dismantled, belongings packed and loaded. Catherine helped as much as she could, amazed at the efficiency and harmony with which they worked. While preparing her few belongings, Nasha entered her temporary shelter. "Your heart is troubled," said the old woman, sitting down beside Catherine. "This danger exists because of me," replied Catherine. "Maybe I should turn myself in, say I ran away of my own free will." Nasha smiled sadly. "Men like your father and your fiancé don't listen to truths they don't want to hear. They would find another reason to hunt us." His wrinkled fingers gently touched Catherine's face. "The path before you has two paths. One leads back to the cage you knew. The other leads into the unknown. How will I know which one to choose? Your heart has already chosen. Your feet just need to follow." The journey began at dusk. The tribe moved like shadows among the rocky canyons, knowing paths invisible to the untrained eye. Tocho rode alongside Catherine, occasionally guiding her as the path became steeper. Under the silver moonlight, Catherine watched the Apache families, mothers carrying babies, elderly people leaning on sticks, children holding small personal treasures. Real people, not the savages from the stories her father told. "What's it like to always live on the move?" he asked Tocho during a brief rest break. "For the Apache, home is no place," he replied, looking up at the stars. "Home is the people, the stories, the paths we travel together." Something about those words resonated deeply with Catherine. Her entire life had been defined by walls, her father's house, the fort, the social expectations that imprisoned her. Here, under the open sky, I felt a freedom I had never known. "And your wife?" he asked softly. "You talked little about her." Tocho's face hardened briefly before softening at the memory. Kiona was like spring wind, gentle but strong. Our son only had 4 winters. Catherine hesitantly touched Tocho's arm. "I am really sorry." "Pain is part of life," he replied simply, "like joy." For a moment their eyes met, and Catherine felt something pass between them, a silent understanding, a mutual recognition of loss and hope. The moment was interrupted by a young warrior who quickly approached. He spoke to Tocho in Apache, urgent words that made the warrior's face harden. "What there was?" asked Catherine when the messenger departed. "Soldiers have changed direction. They're following our trail." Catherine felt her blood run cold. "Will they catch up to us?" Tocho looked up at the sky, calculating distances and time. "Maybe. We need to divide the group. Families will head north. Warriors will stay behind, create a false trail to the east." "And me?" Tocho studied her for a long moment before responding. "You decide, Catherine. Stay with us or head to the missionaries' refuge. Time to choose your path has arrived." Catherine's heart raced at the weight of Tocho's question. The night wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the distant calls of coyotes as she considered her options. Behind her lay the life she had fled, the rigid confines of the fort, her father's iron control and Reynolds' possessive ambitions. Ahead stretched uncertainty, with this band of survivors who had every reason to distrust her. "I stay," she said firmly, surprised by her own certainty. "My knowledge can help your people." Something flickered in Tocho's eyes, relief, perhaps, or respect. He nodded once. "Camino difícil, hard path. All paths worth taking are," she answered. The camp divided swiftly. Catherine joined the main group heading north, while Tocho led a small band of warriors to create the diversion. Before departing, he approached her one last time. 3 days to mountains," he said, handing her a small knife with a bone handle. "Keep this close." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Catherine felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, despite the cool night air. Return safely, she whispered. Always do, he replied, with the hint of a smile that transformed his solemn face. The journey through the night was grueling. Catherine traveled alongside Nijoni, helping elderly members of the tribe when they faltered. By dawn, they had traversed a vast expanse of rugged terrain, seeking refuge in a sheltered ravine where they could rest during the dangerous daylight hours. "You move well for white woman," Nijoni commented, as they settled beneath an overhang of red rock. "Most would cry for comfortable bed." Catherine smiled wryly. "I've been preparing for this my whole life without knowing it. My father believed comfort made women weak." "Your father wrong about many things," Nijoni replied, offering Catherine dried berries from a small pouch. Throughout the day, Catherine tended to those suffering from exhaustion and minor injuries. An elderly man named Hania had developed a painful blister that threatened infection. Using herbs she'd collected earlier and techniques learned from both her mother and the Apache, Catherine created a poultice that brought immediate relief. "Medicine woman has good hands," Hania told her in halting English. "Good heart, too." His acceptance warmed her more than any praise she'd received in her father's world. As dusk approached, a scout returned with troubling news. The diversion had worked, but only partially. While most soldiers followed the false trail east, Reynolds had kept a smaller group searching the original path. "He knows," Catherine whispered to herself. "He knows I'd stay with the main group." Nasha approached as the tribe prepared to move again. "Man who hunts you has tracker with Pima blood," she said. "Sees things others cannot." "What should we do?" Catherine asked, fear knotting her stomach. The old woman's eyes reflected the rising moon. "Sometimes we must turn and face what pursues us." That night, they traveled faster, pushing deeper into increasingly mountainous terrain. Catherine's muscles screamed with each step, but she refused to complain. These people had endured far worse at the hands of men like her father. Near midnight, as they navigated a treacherous mountain pass, a young scout rushed down the trail. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing urgently behind him. "What's happening?" Catherine asked Nijoni. "Soldiers, close, coming up South Trail." Panic rippled through the group. Mothers clutched children closer. Elders looked to the heavens in silent prayer. The tribe huddled in the shadow of a massive boulder while leaders conferred urgently. Catherine's mind raced. If Reynolds captured her now, he would slaughter everyone, men, women, children, and claim they had been her kidnappers. No one would question his version of events. "I need to go to them," she said suddenly, standing. "I can lead them away." Nijoni grabbed her arm. "They kill you!" "No," Catherine replied, thinking quickly. "Reynolds needs me alive and unharmed to secure my father's continued support. If I approach alone, claim I escaped." "You return to Cage?" Nasha asked, appearing beside them like a shadow. Catherine swallowed hard. "To save your people?" "Yes." The elderly woman studied her face. "Your heart speaks truth, but there is another way." She turned and called to a young warrior who produced a small bundle wrapped in leather. Inside was a distinctive beaded necklace, one Catherine recognized immediately. "That's mine," she gasped. "From my room at the fort." Nasha nodded. "Tocho took when scouting there before. Now it will protect us." The plan formed quickly. The necklace would be planted far to the west, along with other items suggesting Catherine had traveled that direction alone. A small group of warriors would create tracks consistent with a woman traveling in haste. "Reynolds will follow," Nasha said confidently. "Man like him believes woman cannot survive alone in desert. His pride will make him certain." As dawn approached, Catherine watched the decoy party disappear into the darkness. The remaining tribe members continued north, moving with renewed urgency toward the safety of the mountains. "What if it doesn't work?" Catherine asked Nijoni as they climbed higher into the pine-scented elevations. "Then we fight," the young widow answered simply. as we always have. By midday, they reached a plateau sheltered by towering pines. Ancient stone structures, partially reclaimed by nature, suggested this had once been a permanent settlement. "Safe place," Nijoni explained. "Sacred ground. We wait here for Tocho." As the tribe established camp, Catherine found herself standing at the edge of the plateau, looking south across the vast expanse they had traversed. Somewhere out there, Tocho was risking his life to protect his people. And her. The realization struck her with surprising force. In less than 2 weeks, these savages had shown her more humanity than she had experienced in years at the fort. Here, despite being the daughter of their enemy, she had found purpose, respect, and perhaps something more. Something that made her heart quicken when she thought of a certain warrior with solemn eyes and a rare, transformative smile. "Please return safely," she whispered to the wind, clutching the bone-handled knife he had given her. "There is much I still need to learn." The first rays of sunlight bathed the camp when Tocho returned. Catherine watched the entrance to the clearing, sitting on a rock, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the familiar figure of the warrior, accompanied by 3 other men. 4 days had passed since the group's separation, 4 days of constant vigil and silent prayers that she had never known she knew. Tocho appeared exhausted, with his face obscured by desert dust and a superficial cut on his left arm. Still, when his eyes met hers, a brief smile lit up his face. "Reynolds took the false trail," he announced as he approached. "For now, we are safe." Catherine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're hurt." "Small cut. Nothing serious." He made a dismissive gesture, but Catherine had already gotten up, instinctively moving to his side. "Let me see. Infections are dangerous, even in small wounds." Under the curious gaze of several tribesmen, she examined the cut. It wasn't deep, but it needed cleaning. Guiding Tocho to his small tent, Catherine prepared an infusion of herbs that Nijoni had taught her, effective against infections and pain. "How did it happen?" he asked as he gently cleaned the wound. "Soldier spotted us. We managed to escape, but not before a small battle." Catherine froze. "Did someone die?" "Not this time." Tocho's gaze fixed on the horizon. "But soldiers will come back. They always do." Silence fell between them as Catherine finished the dressing. His fingers worked deftly, but his mind wandered. Each day among the Apache revealed new facets of a people his father and the American army had categorically labeled as savages. He had seen mothers cradling children, elders telling ancient stories under the stars, children laughing as they learned to hunt small animals. A community united by bonds deeper than any society he had known. "Your hand is gentle," Tocho observed, interrupting his thoughts. "You have a gift for healing. My mother said the best healers are those who have known pain." Catherine smiled sadly. "I suppose I qualify." Tocho studied his face for a long moment. "Yesterday, Nasha said you helped Little Crow when the fever took him. You saved his life. I just applied what I learned from you and my mother. It's finding its place among us. It wasn't a question, but an observation." Catherine nodded slowly. "It's strange. I spent years at the fort feeling like an outsider, even though I'm the same race as everyone else. Here, among people who should consider me an enemy, I find connection." A warning shout interrupted the conversation. Tocho stood up immediately, his body tense as a bowstring. Catherine followed him out of the tent, where a young warrior pointed toward the southern horizon. "Dust," Tocho translated, his face hardening. "Lots of horses." The camp became a hive of activity. Women gathering essential belongings, warriors readying weapons, children being rushed to their elders. "Reynolds?" Catherine asked, fear tightening her chest. "Maybe. Or Apaches from another band." Not all of them are peaceful like us. Nasha approached, leaning on her carved cane. She spoke quickly to Tocho in Apache, her emphatic gestures suggesting a heated debate. "What does she say?" Catherine asked as the old woman walked away. "It says we should stay and wait. He had a dream. This place will protect us." "And you believe it?" Tocho hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the ancient stone ruins that surrounded the camp. "I learned to trust her wisdom, but I also prepare a bow and knife." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "If it's Reynolds and he finds me with you, it's your chance to choose your path," Tocho said, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling intensity. "You can go back to your world, say we kept you prisoner, save your position." The suggestion hit her like a slap. "Do you think I would betray them like that, after everything?" For an instant, vulnerability crossed the warrior's normally controlled countenance. "Your world pulls hard, Catherine. Luxury, security, acceptance. Accept what? A gilded prison? A forced marriage to a man who boasts about killing his people?" Catherine took a step toward him. "This is my place now, with your people." Something indefinable crossed Tocho's face. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once, before addressing the warriors gathered at the camp's entrance. Catherine returned to her tent to gather her medicinal supplies. If there was a confrontation, there would be injuries. In the midst of her preparation, she found the small mirror that Nijoni had given her, her first glimpse of herself since her escape. The face that stared back at her seemed like a stranger's. Sun-tanned skin, dark hair loose in an Apache style, green eyes that seemed simultaneously older and more alive. "Catherine!" Nijoni's voice interrupted his contemplation. "Come see!" Leaving hastily, Catherine joined the crowd, watching the approaching knights. They were not American soldiers, but a group of about 20 Apache, led by a tall man in war paint, unlike the ones Tocho wore. "Chiricahua," whispered Nijoni. "Cousins of ours, but different path. They seek war, not peace." Catherine watched Tocho walk to meet the newcomers, accompanied by 2 elders. The tension was palpable as the leaders spoke. "What is happening?" asked Nijoni. "Chiricahua brings news and warning. They say a large group of soldiers are moving through the territory, more than just looking for you. It looks like a military operation." A shiver ran down Catherine's spine. He was well aware of his father's methods when it came to the natives. It wasn't just about finding her. It was an opportunity to attack any Apache camp they came across along the way. When the meeting ended, the Chiricahua left as quickly as they had arrived. Tocho returned to camp, his face an unreadable mask. "What did they say?" Catherine asked as he approached. "Army moves in 3 columns, burning villages, destroying crops." His eyes met hers. "Your father leads one of them." Silence hung like thick fog after Tocho's words. Catherine felt the weight of guilt settle on her shoulders. Her father, the man who had raised her with an iron fist, now commanded a wave of destruction across Apache country, a territory she had begun to consider home. "How many days until they get here?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Maybe 3 if they keep going in that direction." Tocho looked at the distant mountains. "Council meets now to decide next step." The camp was buzzing with activity as the news spread. Mothers prepared provisions, warriors checked weapons, elders gathered in a circle under the centuries-old oak. Catherine watched everything with a heavy heart, knowing that her presence was at the center of this storm. "I must go," he said suddenly. "If I turn myself in, maybe my father will back down." Tocho turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "Colonel Montgomery doesn't just seek you. He seeks to eliminate my people. It's always been that way." "But I could try." "No." The firmness in his voice surprised Catherine. It would be a sacrifice without a purpose. A young mother walked past them, carrying a baby wrapped in a colorful blanket. The sight of the little Apache families strengthened Catherine's resolve. She couldn't just abandon them. "Then I will fight alongside you," he declared, lifting his chin in defiance. "I can help." A rare smile touched Tocho's lips. "It already helps. Every life your hands heal is victory against those who wish our death." Nasha approached, her ancient eyes assessing them both. He spoke briefly in Apache to Tocho, who nodded several times. When he finished, he turned to Catherine. "Council has decided that you should go with Nijoni and children to sacred caves," Tocho translated. "Secret location, known only to our people." "While you face the army," Catherine shook her head. "I can't just hide." Nasha touched Catherine's arm. "Some battles are fought with weapons," he said in his broken English. "Others fight to protect their future. Children need healing and protection." The meaning behind the old woman's words slowly sunk in. Catherine wouldn't be running away. She would be protecting the tribe's most vulnerable, using her knowledge to ensure there was a future for those children. "I will," he finally agreed. The rest of the day passed in frantic preparations. Catherine helped organize medical supplies, carefully packing herbs and instruments. Nijoni taught him the symbols that would mark the path to the sacred caves and the signs they would use to communicate silently. At dusk, Catherine sought out Tocho, finding him at the edge of the camp, gazing at the blood-red horizon. His profile silhouetted against the setting sun seemed carved from stone, firm, resilient, eternal like the mountains themselves. "I'm scared," she admitted, standing next to him. "Fear keeps you alert," he replied without looking away from the horizon. "Just don't let it control your decisions." "It's not that." Catherine hesitated. "I'm afraid of losing all of this. What I found here." Tocho turned to face her, and something in his gaze made her heart race. "What did you find between us, Catherine?" Words stuck in his throat. How to explain the transformation he had undergone in these weeks? How can you say that you had never felt so alive, so connected, to yourself, to the earth, to the people around you? "I found freedom," he finally replied, "and purpose. And—" His voice trailed off. Tocho's fingers gently touched her wrist where her father's scar remained, not as a mark of possession, but as a reminder of what she had overcome. "You have Apache spirit," he said, his voice softer than Catherine had ever heard. "Strong as a mountain, free as an eagle." Something changed in the air between them, a tension charged with possibility. Catherine felt the almost irresistible impulse to get closer, to break the distance that separated them. In Tocho's eyes, he saw the same desire, the same fight. "Do you promise to come back?" she whispered. "Apache makes no promises about the future," he replied, "only about intentions, and my intention is to return to—" He hesitated. "To my people." Dawn came too quickly. The protection group, led by Nijoni, left as the first golden lights touched the mountain tops. 17 children, 6 elderly people and 4 women, including Catherine, would proceed to the sacred caves. The warriors and other members of the tribe would disperse in different directions, creating confusion for his father's troops. When it was time to leave, Tocho approached Catherine. Wordlessly, he removed an eagle feather from his hair and placed it in her hands. "For protection," he said simply, "and to remember the way back." "I'll be back," Catherine promised. Then, as if he could resist no longer, Tocho leaned forward and touched his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy that Catherine sensed was deeply meaningful. The heat of that brief contact seemed to mark her more deeply than any kiss. As the small group moved away along the mountainous trails, Catherine looked back one last time, catching a glimpse of Tocho silhouetted against the rising sun. Despite the imminent danger, a certainty grew in her heart. Regardless of what her father and Reynolds planned, she had found her true home. The journey to the sacred caves proved more arduous than Catherine had imagined. For 2 days, the small group crossed narrow valleys and steep trails, always vigilant against possible army patrols. The children walked in impressive silence, trained from an early age for survival, Catherine realized. Nijoni led the group with quiet determination, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. On the 3rd day, a child fell ill. Little Talasi, just 4 years old, developed a high fever during the night. Catherine worked tirelessly, applying herbal compresses and keeping him hydrated with medicinal infusions she had learned to prepare. "He gets better," whispered Nijoni, observing Catherine's ministrations. "You have good hands." "I hope so," Catherine replied, stroking the boy's black hair. "I can't lose him." The cave that sheltered them was just a resting point, not the final destination. Hidden among rock formations, it offered temporary protection while the boy regained his strength. That night, while the other women prepared a meager meal with limited supplies, Catherine wandered off to the cave entrance. The starry Arizona sky spread before her like a blanket of infinite possibilities. His fingers unconsciously caressed the eagle feather that Tocho had given him. "Worried about warriors?" asked Kimmy, an elderly woman who approached silently. Catherine nodded. "I can't stop thinking about them. About Tocho." An understanding smile crossed the old woman's wrinkled face. "I saw how they look at each other, like the moon looks at the stars. Is it that obvious?" Catherine felt her face burn. "For old eyes like mine, yes." Kimi sat down next to him with surprising agility. "My husband was like Tocho, strong warrior, heart hidden behind many walls." How did you know it was right?" Catherine asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "I didn't know," the old woman replied simply. "I felt it. Here." She touched her own chest. "When the right path appears, the feet know it before the head." The next morning, Talasi's condition had improved significantly. With renewed hope, the group continued their journey, following a canyon so narrow that at some points they had to cross in single file. It was at noon that they heard the first shots. Distant but unmistakable, the echoes of rifles reverberated off the rock walls. Catherine froze, her heart racing painfully. Nijoni quickly organized the group into defensive formation, hiding the children among the rocks. "Soldiers?" Catherine whispered. Nijoni nodded grimly. "And our warriors." For endless hours, they remained motionless as distant sounds of battle reached them. Catherine held Talasi against her chest, whispering reassuring words that not even she herself believed. Each shot seemed to pierce his own heart. Was Tocho safe? How many Apache defended their lives against modern army rifles? By dusk, an uneasy silence had descended over the mountains. The gunfire had stopped, but that could mean anything. Nijoni decided they would remain hidden until dawn, when a scout could be sent out for reconnaissance. That night, no one slept. Catherine hugged the eagle feather as if it were her last connection with Tocho, praying to deities she had never met, but who now seemed closer than the god of her childhood. Dawn brought with it an unexpected visitor. "Movement!" whispered one of the women on watch. Everyone tensed, mothers instinctively placing themselves in front of their children. Catherine reached for the knife Tocho had given her, determined to protect the children at any cost. A figure emerged from the pre-dawn shadows, staggering, leaning against the canyon walls. Even in the dim light, Catherine immediately recognized the silhouette. "Tocho!" she exclaimed, running towards him without thinking about the consequences. The Apache warrior collapsed in her arms, his injured body weighing her down. Blood stained his torso, flowing from a wound in his left shoulder. "I found you," he murmured, his face contorted in pain. With Nijoni's help, Catherine took Tocho to the shelter. His medical training kicked in, cleaning the wound, applying the healing herbs, bandaging the shoulder with strips of clean cloth. All the while, Her heart alternated between gratitude for seeing him alive and terror at the severity of his condition. "The others?" Nijoni asked as he helped with the bandages. "Scattered," replied Tocho, his voice weak. "Lots of soldiers. They came from 3 directions." Catherine's eyes met Nijoni's, both understanding the gravity of the situation. Surrounded with few supplies and a wounded warrior. "My father," Catherine said, guilt weighing on every word. "He planned this. Not your fault," Tocho murmured, his bloodied fingers seeking hers. "It was his escape that showed the path to freedom." When the wound finally stabilized, Catherine sat next to Tocho, watching his face numb from exhaustion and blood loss. The children gathered silently around, some bringing small offerings, a wildflower, a glowing stone, placing them next to the warrior like healing talismans. "What do we do now?" Catherine asked Nijoni when they were alone. "Sacred caves are a day's walk away," replied the Apache. "But with Tocho injured and soldiers searching..." Catherine looked at the sleeping warrior, at the frightened children, at the exhausted elderly. A firm resolve grew within her. She would not allow anyone else to suffer because of her. "I have a plan," he finally said, "but I will need your help, and Tocho's eagle feather." As she shared her thoughts with Nijoni, Catherine knew she was risking everything. But looking at Tocho, at the man who had risked his life repeatedly to protect her and her people, she understood that some battles could only be won with the most unlikely of weapons: the truth. The sun was rising over the horizon as Catherine adjusted the makeshift white flag from a piece of her original dress. Beside her, Nijoni tied her hair in the traditional Apache braid, pinning Tocho's eagle feather in its center. "He is sure?" Nijoni asked, his dark eyes filled with concern. Catherine nodded, unconsciously touching the scar on her wrist. "It's our only chance." The last 24 hours had turned Catherine's resolve into something as unbreakable as wrought iron. Tocho was fighting a fever, his gunshot wound aggravated by the exhaustion of escaping. The children looked at her with trust, a trust she dared not betray. "Come back alive," Nijoni said, squeezing her arm, "or Tocho will hunt me down in the spirit world for letting you go." With one last glance at the sleeping warrior, Catherine began her descent down the rocky trails. The plan was simple and desperate: find the military camp, confront his father, and negotiate peace for the Apaches who had become his family. The desert landscape came to life with the dawn, saturated colors of red and gold spilling over the rock formations. Catherine walked for hours, following trails that weeks before would have been invisible to her. Apache knowledge now flowed through his blood, mixing with his white heritage in ways he had never imagined possible. It was shortly after noon when he saw the column of smoke. The military camp. Taking a deep breath, she raised the white flag and headed towards her destination. The first warning shots cut the air above her head, causing her to stop instantly. He kept the flag raised as voices shouted orders. "Don't shoot!" he exclaimed at the top of his lungs. "I'm Catherine Montgomery." Silence followed the screams. Then a group of soldiers appeared, rifles pointed in their direction. A young officer stepped forward, eyes wide in disbelief. "Miss Montgomery? Good God! Find the colonel!" Minutes later, Catherine was in the center of the camp, surrounded by curious soldiers and astonished officers. She stood erect, aware of the strange figure she formed, dressed in Apache garb, hair adorned with the sacred feather, skin tanned by the merciless desert sun. Then the crowd parted, and his father appeared. Colonel Robert Montgomery looked as if he had aged years. His impeccable uniform contrasted with his face marked by tiredness and concern. For an instant, Catherine glimpsed something in his eyes, relief, perhaps, before the usual mask of authority fell over his features. "Catherine." The voice sounded like stone on metal. He finally came to his senses. "No, Dad, I finally found my truth." A murmur ran through the camp. Behind her father, Catherine recognized the burly figure of General Reynolds, watching her with a mixture of fury and greed that made her stomach turn. "This is ridiculous," Reynolds roared, stepping forward. "Look at her! Clearly corrupted by the savages. We must mount an attack immediately and exterminate those responsible." Catherine kept her eyes fixed on her father. "I was not kidnapped, nor forced. I chose to flee a marriage that disgusted me with a man who massacres innocent people." The silence that followed was absolute. Soldiers exchanged nervous glances as Reynolds turned pale with rage. "Enough of this nonsense," his father snapped. "You will return with us immediately." "Not without guarantees," replied Catherine, lifting her chin. "I came to negotiate peace for the people who welcomed me." Reynolds burst into cruel laughter. "Negotiate? With savages? The girl has gone completely crazy." Catherine turned to the officers present. "You attacked peaceful people who just wanted to live in their ancestral lands. Women, children, elderly people. This is not war, it is extermination." "Catherine," her father's voice sounded warning, "don't test my patience." "Or what, Dad? Are you going to mark me again?" She deliberately lifted her scarred wrist, eliciting shocked murmurs among the soldiers. "Everyone here knows what happens to the Apaches they capture. Maybe they should know what happens to daughters who disobey." Colonel Montgomery's face hardened like granite. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Catherine looked around at the faces of the soldiers, some too young to understand what they were participating in. "The Apaches who took me in saved my life. They healed my body and spirit. They showed me a world where freedom is not just an empty word." Reynolds stepped forward, grabbing his arm tightly. "Enough of this insanity! Colonel, control your daughter or I—" "Get your hands off her!" The voice came from behind them, firm, clear and familiar. Catherine spun around, her heart nearly stopping. Tocho was there, staggering but standing, leaning on a makeshift spear. Blood still stained the bandages on his shoulder, but his eyes burned with iron determination. "Tocho!" cried Catherine. "You should be by your side," he finished simply. As promised. The rifles rose instantly, but Catherine placed herself between them and Tocho. "Put your weapons down," he shouted. "He came in peace. If a single shot is fired, the children in the caves will never survive without our return." Palpable tension gripped the camp. Catherine looked into her father's eyes, searching for the man she had once known, before the bitterness and cruelty. "Father," he said softly, "there is another way. There always has been." Something flickered in the colonel's gaze, an uncertainty, a memory perhaps of the time before his wife's death, when there was still goodness in his soul. Reynolds advanced. "It's an obvious trap. They're biding their time while other wildlings position themselves to attack." "Silence!" Colonel Montgomery's voice cut the air like a whip. His eyes remained fixed on his daughters. "What do you propose, Catherine?" "Peace. Demarcated lands where the Apache can live without persecution. End attacks on peaceful camps." Reynolds snorted. "Impossible. The girl is—" "Will you marry General Reynolds?" his father interrupted, ignoring the other man's protests. Her shrewd eyes assessed her daughter, looking for gaps in her determination. Catherine looked at Tocho, whose gaze communicated more than words could. Then he faced his father. "No, I will never live in a prison again, whether it is made of walls or conventions." Colonel Montgomery slowly studied his daughter, no longer the obedient young woman he had known, but a woman forged by wilderness and freedom. Then his gaze moved to Tocho, assessing the Apache warrior who remained erect despite his injury. "You love him," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Catherine didn't hesitate. Yes. The sun reached its zenith when Colonel Montgomery made his decision. a decision that would forever change the destiny of two peoples and of two hearts that had found, in the most unlikely of places, a love stronger than the hate that separated them.